kota metropolitan kelap-kelip lampu nang dalan ayo kanca ngundang wisatawan mlaku-mlaku nang tunjungan rame-rame
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for the sparkling of Surabaya dance performed by Ubaya students.
We invite all guests to stand up for the Indonesian national anthem.
All of the guests, please be seated. The Honorable Dr. Andes Enggartiasto Lukito, Republic of Indonesia Minister of Trade, Representative of Peace,
Laureates
and Platinum Sponsor from Suara Surabaya, JW Marriott Hotel Surabaya, PT Pakuan Jati, PT Viva Kosmetik, PT Jamu Ibu Jaya, and Sono Kembang Catering.
The IPF has been established exclusively for non-profit purposes, in particular to support peace universities as well as promoting peace activities, understanding and social exchange between people, their culture and traditions.
In 2017, the 6th ASEAN event series, Bridges Dialogue Towards a Culture of Peace, will take place in Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam from January to March, following the successful Bridges series, which have been held in Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, Singapore since 2003.
In Indonesia, Ubaya is really honored to host several other universities in Indonesia.
The brief agenda of this event are opening and welcoming remarks by Ubaya Acting Rector, Republic of Indonesia Minister of Trade, and the IPF. Session by Professor Eric Prof Maskin, followed by question and answer session, and continued with the Tari Marak performance by Ubaya students.
And concluded with memento presentations to Professor Maskin, Ubaya inscription signing, and the award presentations to the winners of opinion writing competitions. As the first opening remarks, we have Dr. Nemuel Daniel Pah as Ubaya Acting Rector to deliver his speech. Now please give applause to Dr. Nemuel Daniel Pah. Dr. Nemuel, time is yours.
The Honorable the Minister of Trade, Republic of Indonesia, represented by Dr. Kasan, Special Advisor for International Affairs, Dr. Haji Soekarwo, or his representative, Governor of East Java Province, Engineer Tri Risma Harini, MT, the City Mayor of Surabaya or her representative, and Professor Eric Stark Maskin, the 2007 Nobel laureate in economics, Consulate Generals of United States, China, Japan, and other neighboring countries of Indonesia, Mr. Anton Priyatno, the chairman of Ubaya Foundation, Ms. Alisa Wahid, the daughter of Gus Dur, the former president of Indonesia, Professor of Republic of Indonesian House of Representatives, Mr. Hengki Kurniadi, the member of Republic of Indonesian House of Parliament, and the leaders of universities, partners of University of Surabaya, including the Vice Rector of Beijing Jiaotong Universities, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. On behalf of University of Surabaya, I would like to this and to host this astonishing event. Express my greatest gratitude and cordially welcome the 2007 Nobel laureate in economics, Professor Eric Stark Maskin, to Ubaya. It is surely a great honor and pleasure for Ubaya to be given a distinctive opportunity to officially host this Bridges event and welcome Professor Maskin. I'm sure today, Professor Maskin will deliver to us a very interesting and informative lecture on why global markets have failed to reduce inequality. If we try to take a glimpse, we are now living in a global market, which in theory should encourage equality to all of us. But yet in reality, shows totally different thing. Equality is even though one of the reasons that I, Professor Maskin, study, low skills, the global market, higher competency. So this gap of inequality, which may distract the word peace and social justice. Well, that's just a brief perspective of what I can understand from what Professor Maskin will further reveal us and inspire us today. In attention to higher education, such as Ubaya, to play an important role to reduce inequality in global market. I realize that it's a very difficult task, and as well as for all of us and as well as for Ubaya. But I'm pleased that we are looking forward to take this challenge, and one of which through this event today. I hope this event will raise the awareness and commitment of businesses, governments, as well as all the relevant parties to be collectively and actively cultivating world peace through positive and unselfish economic practices. I believe by the conclusion of this event, we will be one step ahead in helping to reduce inequality that would be beneficial for humanity and world peace. Well, let me conclude my remarks by wishing all the participants every success in this general lecture, and may all our fruitful works come to an excellent. Now I declare the 6th Asian Event Series, Bridges Dialogues Towards a Culture of Peace, Why Global Markets Have Failed to Reduce Inequality by Professor Eric Maskin at Ubaya is officially open. Thank you.
As the second session of opening remarks, we now have the speech session by Republic of Indonesia Minister of Trade, delivered by Dr. Insinyur Kasan, Magister Management, as Special Advisor in International Affairs. Please give a round of applause to Dr. Insinyur Kasan, Magister Management. Dr. Kasan, the floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang menjelang sore. Salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Pertama kali mungkin saya ingin mohon maaf. Please allow me to deliver my short speech in Bahasa, especially for our colleagues from Consulate General in Surabaya, and also special lecture in this event to Professor Eric S. Maskin, 2007 Nobel laureate in economics. And also I have to apologize my boss, Pak Enggar, as a Minister of Trade. So because at the same time, he has to accompanied by our President when the Prime Minister of Japan is coming today in Bogor, Istana Bogor. Bapak Ibu sekalian, jadi saya mohon maaf terutama kepada tadi yang saya singgung. Pertama-tama yang terhormat tentu saya sampaikan ke tuan rumah, Ketua Yayasan Universitas Ubaya, Pak Anton, juga yang barusan mewakili Pak Rektor, Pak Wakil Rektor 1, Pak Daniel, juga tadi wakil dari pemerintahan di Jawa Timur, ada dari provinsi, teman saya juga ada dari wali kota, dan juga dari anggota dewan, yang lain juga yang saya terhormat, yang tidak bisa saya satu persatu, Bu Alisa juga. Nah, Bapak Ibu sekalian, saya hari ini diminta Pak Mendag mewakili beliau karena berhalangan tadi. Sebenarnya beliau sangat ingin hadir pada saat ini, dan itu sudah saya tahu sendiri sudah dijadwalkan jauh-jauh hari, tapi kemudian tiba-tiba ada jadwal tadi. Pertama tentu marilah kita panjatkan puji dan syukur karena pada siang dan menjelang sore ini saya pun berkesempatan bisa menghadiri event yang sangat penting. Kenapa? Karena pertama, event hari ini yang adalah merupakan the first event in Indonesia untuk the 6th Asian Event Series Bridges Dialogue Toward kaitan dengan saya bisa sampaikan kesenjangan, dalam arti kesenjangan ekonomi. Nah, Bapak Presiden menyinggung mengenai isu ini pada saat tanggal 10 Januari yang lalu. Salah satu di antara tantangan ekonomi yang dihadapi oleh Indonesia, tingkat kesenjangan, pengangguran, dan juga kemiskinan. Oleh karena itu, saya melihat bahwa event hari ini itu tadi relevansi sangat klop, baik dari isu yang disajikan maupun dari pembicara yang tentunya lihat bahwa tingkat kesenjangan ekonomi yang ada di Indonesia sebenarnya kalau dibandingkan dengan negara lain tidak terlampau buruk. Nah, sebagai catatan, 3 tahun terakhir mungkin dari 2014, 2015, 2016, meskipun penurunannya 0,1, 0,1, dari 0,41 di 2014 jadi 0,40 di 2015 dan 0,39 di 2016, itu merupakan satu capaian yang cukup baik. Memang kalau kita lihat di beberapa daerah, kalau diterjemahkan tingkat kesenjangan ekonomi, itu tadi angka nasional, tentu tidak merata tingkat yang terjadi. Termasuk saya yakin di Surabaya Gini rasionya seharusnya lebih rendah daripada tingkat. Kalau saya melihat secara fisik di dalam kenyataan yang ada. Nah, kemudian tentu keberhasilan di dalam pencapaian oleh pemerintah yang sudah tentu telah melakukan beberapa kebijakan. Saya kebetulan ditugaskan oleh Pak Menteri Perdagangan juga sebagai salah satu PIC untuk diseminasi kebijakan ekonomi, paket kebijakan ekonomi, yang sampai saat ini sudah ada 14 paket kebijakan ekonomi. Nah, kebijakan yang disampaikan atau digulirkan oleh pemerintah itu juga bukan hanya itu. Kita melihat bahwa pembangunan infrastruktur misalnya itu adalah juga bagian daripada upaya mengarah kepada mengurangi ini. Struktur yang sama, akses untuk aktivitas ekonomi itu akan makin baik. Sehingga keterlibatan masyarakat akan jauh lebih baik dari kedua. Nah, hal yang sudah mengarah kepada salah satu upaya mengurangi tingkat kesenjangan ekonomi. Nah, lalu bagaimana lagi visi misi dari seorang menteri harus produksi dalam negeri. Yang kedua adalah menjaga neraca perdagangan. Yang ketiga yaitu kaitan dengan yang namanya revitalisasi pasar rakyat. Saya tidak mau menyebut pasar tradisional karena ada yang nanti pasar tradisional, pasar modern. Sekarang istilahnya disebut sebagai pasar rakyat. Saya kira lebih mengena untuk konteks inequality tadi, kesenjangan tadi. Kenapa? Karena pertama produksi dan berpendapatan masih di bawah. Nah, tadi kesenjangan tentu indeksnya dari situ juga. Nah, kemudian hal berkaitan dengan neraca perdagangan yang mana kita berhubungan menurut saya itu bagian dari juga berkontribusi terhadap mengurangi tingkat kesenjangan ekonomi. Nah, oleh karena itu dari ketiga kebijakan yang dilaksanakan oleh Kementerian Perdagangan sebenarnya berharap minimal bisa mengurangi, kalau kebijakan pertama stabilisasi harga ujungnya ke inflasi, Bapak Ibu bisa dimengerti yang identik dekat dengan kemiskinan akan isu yang pada hari ini akan Nah, oleh karena itu kalaupun tadi saya sampaikan angka itu makin baik, itu masih jauh dari yang seharusnya kita capai. Tidak sampai 0,4. Nah, oleh karena bagaimana solusinya? Dan semoga acara hari sampai selesai untuk juga mendapatkan pelajaran berharga sebagai bekal dari saya di dalam melaksanakan tugas sebagai civil servant. Itu saja, mohon maaf apabila ada hal yang kurang berkenan, dan selamat mengikuti kuliah umum ini. Semoga kita diridhoi oleh Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, dan semoga lancar untuk acara atau event pada hari ini. Demikian, saya tutup.
Thank you, Dr. Kassan, for the inspiring speech. To conclude the opening remarks, we now have Mr. Uwe Morawetz from the IPF to deliver his remarks. Please give a round of applause to Mr. Uwe Morawetz. Mr. Morawetz, the floor is yours.
Yeah, welcome to the 6th ASEAN event series, Bridges, Dialogues Towards a Culture of Internet Non-Religious Foundation, under the common patronage of 20 Nobel Peace Prize laureates based in Vienna. The events are hosted in cooperation with various local partners, including the country's major universities, and I would like to thank Ubaya for hosting our event today. Starting this January 2017, Bridges will now be continuously held in Indonesia until March, involving the participation of Nobel laureates for peace, physics, chemistry, medicine, and economics. The 6th ASEAN Bridges series follows a series of over 600 Bridges events which the International Peace Foundation has already hosted in Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Singapore since 2003 as an independent contribution towards the culture of peace and nonviolence, which was initiated and promoted by the United Nations General Assembly. Bridges has been established as an international, intercultural, and interdisciplinary platform for creative cultures of learning and continued education for all people. The International Peace Foundation has no concept for peace and no fixed solution how to achieve peace, but we believe that the first step towards peace is dialogue, and the first step towards dialogue is respect. The International Peace Foundation does not take sides, but acts as a mediator by creating an independent platform for dialogue where people meet who normally don't meet. People from all walks of life, people who speak different languages, even if they speak the same. As politicians speak another language than artists, and business and religious leaders another one than scientists, it is seldom that they speak with each other or even work together. We live in a world where some people pretend to know the answers and solutions, how to solve problems, how to achieve peace, though the quest for peace lies in the art to pose the right questions. The International Peace Foundation believes that the interconnected problems of our world today cannot be solved only by politicians, only by business, only by scientists or by religion alone, but by working together. So in the Bridges event series, people from all walks of life meet in a multidisciplinary program to find creative solutions to solve problems and to achieve peace. Peace within ourselves, within our families, within social structures, peace with nature and the environment, peace between nations, cultures, and religions. Peace is a process. Dialogue is a process. It is nothing which can be achieved instantly. It needs time. This is why Bridges is not organized as a single conference, but as a series of events over the period of 3 months in which Nobel laureates build bridges with leaders in all parts of society and with the general public. Peace is not something which can be left to the elite of a few, but which needs the participation of everyone. Only if many ways cross and people walking these ways meet, can international understanding be achieved and problems commonly solved. If we listen to and learn from each other, we may discover that there is not only one way to achieve peace, but that there are many ways and certainly ways we have never thought of to go. It is my pleasure to invite you today to listen to and share your views with Professor Eric Maskin, a Nobel laureate for economics who has agreed to come to Indonesia to help build bridges. We all look forward to his keynote speech and to his important contribution towards peace. A warm welcome, Professor Eric Maskin. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Mr. Morawetz, for the informative IPF speech. After the opening remarks, now we move to the most awaited session that we have been waiting. General lecture on why global markets have failed to reduce inequality, delivered by Professor Eric Maskin as the 2007 Nobel laureate in economics.
Professor Eric Maskin is known as an American economist who was awarded the Nobel laureate for economics in 2007 for having laid the foundations of mechanism design theory. He taught at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and was the Albert O. Hirschman Professor of Social Science at the Institute for Advanced Study and a visiting professor at Princeton University before becoming the Adam University Professor at Harvard. Professor Maskin has worked in diverse areas of economic theory, such as game theory, the economic of incentive, and contract theory.
He is particularly well known for his papers on mechanism design, implementation theory, and dynamic games. His current research projects include comparing different electoral rules, examining the cause of inequality, and studying coalition formation. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Art and Science, Econometric Society, and the European Economic Association, and a corresponding fellow of the British Academy. He was president of the Econometric Society in 2003.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very big ovation to Professor Eric Maskin. Professor Maskin, the floor is yours.
Testing. It seems to work, and thank you so much for that welcome, and thank you for coming out this afternoon. It's a pleasure, a great pleasure, to have this chance to speak here at the University of Surabaya. I would like to thank the university for the very warm reception that we've had. We arrived in town last night. We were treated to a dinner at the mayor's residence, and today I've spent the whole day here at the university talking to professors, talking to press. It's been a terrific experience. We're going to top things off tonight by going to Mount Bromo and hoping to see the sunrise tomorrow morning. I'd also like to thank the International Peace Foundation for its essential role in creating bridges. It's an honor for me to be a small ingredient in the bridge building that they are doing. Well, this afternoon, I'd like to speak to you on a topic which I think we can all agree is of great importance: the connection between globalization and inequality. I don't have to tell you that there has been an enormous increase in globalization over the last 20 years. You have only to walk down the street around the world are meant of production, something that I'm going to be a whole set of around the world. In Paris, for example, you can communicate with your managers and your employees in Southeast Asia. And then, of course, the removal of trade barriers, the creation of organizations like ASEAN have been important contributors to globalization. The support on its behalf. One such promise was to bring prosperity, increasing income to emerging economies. That's a promise which actually has been realized in many cases, and we have only to look at China and India, whose growth rates for now nearly 4 decades in the case of China, have often exceeded 10%. To see how successful globalization has been as a generator of prosperity. China and India would not be where they are today were it not for their ability to trade with the other countries of the world. But there's another promise that has been made on behalf of globalization, which has not always been delivered on, and that is to reduce the gap between the haves of the world and the have-nots of the world. In other words, to reduce inequality in emerging economies. In fact, in many cases, we have seen just the opposites. China and India are, once again, the most prominent examples. Although average income in China has risen dramatically in the last 3 decades, the dispersion of income, the gap between rich and poor has also increased dramatically in China, and that is a worry. Now, inequality has become a big topic in the news, in politics, in general discussion over the last few years. In fact, some pretty dramatic political events in the last year or so can be directly traced to inequality. We've only to look at Brexit in Europe or the election of Donald Trump in the United States or the increasing political position of Marine Le Pen in France to see how inequality can drive politics to a surprising degree. I don't plan to speak, though, about inequality in rich countries like Britain or the United States or France so much today. I want to talk about inequality in emerging economies. And I think there are important reasons for looking at inequality in emerging economies. The first is a moral argument. Many of us believe in egalitarianism, which is the idea that all people should be treated equally. This is a well-established philosophical and religious position. It doesn't mean that everybody ends up the same. It doesn't mean that everybody ends up with the same wealth or the same income, but it does mean that huge gaps in inequality and wealth, and even more importantly, huge gaps in opportunity are offensive. So for moral reasons, there's a lot of reason to worry about increases in inequality. But even if you are not particularly interested in those moral reasons, you might be interested in eliminating poverty. And particularly in emerging economies, there's a strong connection between reducing inequality and pulling people up out of poverty. As you eliminate poverty, as you elevate the poor, you are reducing inequality. So those two issues, poverty reduction and inequality reduction, are intimately related. But even if you don't care about poverty reduction particularly, there's a very practical reason for caring about inequality, and that is that there's a strong correlation between countries that are politically and socially stable and those that have been successful in reducing inequality. A country with rising inequality is in danger of being torn apart. And once again, to go back to recent political events, the United States, although it's a rich country, has experienced quite dramatic increases in inequality over the last couple of decades. And as we've seen recently, it has been torn apart to the extent that it is more polarized than it is at any time since probably the late 19th or early 20th century. So just for the sake of holding society together, we must do something about rising inequality. Now, I said that proponents of globalization argued that increasing globalization would decrease inequality in emerging economies. So should we be surprised that that prediction turned out to be untrue? Well, I think the answer is yes, because that prediction was based on a very successful and very important idea from economic theory, and that's the theory of comparative advantage. The theory of comparative advantage is one of the best established principles in economics. It goes back over 200 years to David Ricardo, who was a British economist in the early 19th century. And most importantly, it's been a very successful theory because over the last 200 years, it has correctly predicted and explained international trade patterns time and time again. I said that this is by no means the first globalization the world has experienced. In all of the previous globalizations, the theory of comparative advantage got things exactly right, and inequality did decline in emerging economies. So one thing I want to do this afternoon is to explore why the theory of comparative advantage doesn't work so well for the current globalization, why the current globalization is different from the previous ones. But before I get to that, I should probably say a few words about why the theory of comparative advantage predicts that inequality should decline in emerging economies when the world becomes more globalized. So let me give you an introductory economics lesson. This will be familiar to the economists here. The theory of comparative advantage takes the view that the important differences between countries from an economic standpoint is their differences in the factors of production. Factors of production are the inputs into the production process. And the most important input into the production process is labor, human sweat, toil, and ingenuity. Now, of course, labor comes in different forms. For the first part of my discussion this afternoon, I'm going to suppose that it takes just two forms. There's high-skilled labor, people who have a significant amount of education and a significant amount of training, and low-skilled labor, people who don't have those opportunities. And what I want to do is to explore the forces of globalization in a little thought experiment where there are two countries. There's a rich country and there's an emerging economy. The rich country is rich because they have more highly skilled workers. The most important resource that any country has is its people, and the more highly trained and highly skilled those people are, the richer the country is. So the rich country will have a higher proportion of high-skilled workers, and that means that the rich country has a comparative advantage, and this is where the term comparative advantage comes in producing goods which require a lot of high-skill labor. So an example of such a good is computer software. For computer software, you need highly trained software engineers. You don't need so much low-skill labor to produce software. The emerging economy, which has a much higher proportion of low-skill labor, according to the theory, is better suited for producing goods where skill doesn't matter so much. Agricultural goods often fall into this category. Agricultural goods such as rice. You don't need a great deal of skill to be able to grow rice. Now, to understand how globalization affects production and affects inequality, I want to look at what happens before the rich country and poor country can trade with one another. I want to look at what happens after they can trade with one another, and the difference between the two must be due to the ability to trade. So globalization, we can see the effect of globalization by looking at the before and after pictures. So what happens before globalization, before the rich country and poor country can trade? Well, in the rich country, people will want to consume both software and rice. They will want both kinds of goods. And so both software and rice will have to be produced in the rich country. Same thing in the emerging economy, in the poor country. Consumers will want both software and rice, and so software and rice will have to be produced in the poor country. But there's a sense in which producing software in the poor country is inefficient because it doesn't make the best use of the labor force in the emerging economy. The emerging economy has a lot of unskilled labor. Those are people who are better suited, better matched to rice production than software production. And so to the extent that production is being diverted away from rice and towards software, that's going to be bad for low-skill workers. They're not needed very much for this software. That means that if more software, less rice is being produced, the demand for low-skill labor is not going to be all that great, and that means that low-skill wages will be relatively low. Of course, just the opposite is true for the high-skill workers in the emerging economy. They greatly benefit from the software production. They get hired, and they see their wages at high levels. Now, what happens once the poor country and the rich country can trade with one another? What happens to the story once the rich country and poor country don't have to rely just on their own production for the goods that they want to consume? Well, in the rich country, we will see a shift away from rice production to software production, and the rich country will import a lot of its rice from the poor country. In the poor country, we'll see a shift away from software, and the emerging economy will be producing more rice. It will import most of its software from the rich country. So the emerging economy will be producing more rice and less software than before. This will be very good for low-skill workers because rice uses low-skill workers more intensively than does software. So we will see an upward pressure on the wage for low-skill workers. At the same time, we will see a downward pressure on the wage for high-skill workers because there's not as much software being produced, so the high-skill labor isn't needed so much. Low-skill wages will be rising, high-skill wages will be falling, and that's a decrease in inequality. So what I've just described to you is the traditional reason that advocates of globalization have given for why globalization ought to reduce inequality in emerging economies. And as I said, this story actually has historically been very accurate. It's worked very well. In the late 19th century, there was an important globalization which involved an increase in trade between Europe and North America. This was made possible by the ability to send goods across the Atlantic Ocean much more cheaply than before. And just as the theory predicted, we saw a decrease in inequality in Europe, which at that point had a relative abundance of low-skilled labor. So Europe was the emerging economy at that point, and the theory got it exactly right. We saw a decline in inequality. And this is not the only previous globalization where the theory was correct. But unfortunately, the theory has not worked so well this time round. It's not worked so well for the globalization that started about 20 years ago. And it's got several things wrong. The theory has got several things wrong. First, the theory says that the bigger the differences between two countries, the more trade there should be between those two countries because those countries have the most to gain from exchange with one another. Well, that's not what has actually happened. If you take the poorest countries of the world, which tend to be countries in Africa, Malawi, for example, you actually see very little trade between Malawi and the richest countries in the world, the countries of Europe or North America, contrary to the theory. So that's one thing that the theory got wrong. And another theory, another prediction that the theory got wrong, and this is the one I've been stressing, is that we have not seen a decline in inequality in emerging economies this time round. Quite the opposite. We've tended to see increases. So this failure of the theory of comparative advantage to explain what has happened with globalization and inequality inspired me, together with a colleague at Harvard, Michael Kramer, to develop a new theory, an alternative theory. This is not so much to replace the theory of comparative advantage, but to supplement it and to try to say why the theory of comparative advantage doesn't apply so much to the current globalization. And the particular emphasis that we make comes back to a point I mentioned at the very beginning of my talk, which is that globalization doesn't just mean trade of goods across international boundaries. It also means an increase in international production. So think of computers, for example. Computers are a good which might be designed in the United States, programmed in Europe, and then assembled in China. So the very production process itself has been globalized. And computers are just one example out of thousands which are now essentially globally produced. The production process itself is global. That, we think, is the key difference between this globalization and previous ones. Now, to make my story clear, just at least four. I'm going to work with four today. And I want to do a thought experiment similar to the one that I did for the theory of comparative advantage. That is, I want to look at two countries, one rich, one poor, before and after globalization. Now, once again, the rich country will be rich because it has highly skilled workers. The four different levels of skill that I'm going to be talking about will be labeled A, B, C, and D. So A are the most highly skilled, then B, then C, and the D workers are the unskilled workers at the bottom. The rich country has the more highly skilled workers, so they have the lion's share of the A and B workers. The emerging economy has workers of skill levels C and D. And according to the theory that I'm proposing, you should think of production as bringing together people who are performing different tasks. So in order to get outputs, you need several different tasks to be performed within your company. To make matters simple, I'll suppose that there are just two tasks. There's a managerial task, which is highly sensitive to skill. And there's a subordinate task in which the skill of the person performing that task doesn't matter so much. And as I said, output is going to be produced by matching a manager with a subordinate, matching a person performing the managerial task with the subordinate task together, and the amount of outputs that you produce when you do this matching will depend on the skill levels of the people in the two jobs. Now, some of you might actually like to see a little mathematical formula, and I have one for you. For those of you who don't want to see any math, this is a good time to have a nap. So if you need a nap, it's the middle of the afternoon. It's a good time for a siesta. Have a 10-minute nap, and I'll wake you up when the time comes. But for those of you who would like to see the formula, here it is. So outputs equals managerial skill squared. That means that we're multiplying the managerial skill by itself times the subordinate skill. And this is getting at the idea that output is more sensitive to the manager's skill than to the subordinate skill. So for example, if the manager's skill was 4 and the subordinate skill was 3, the total output would be 4 squared, or 4 times 4, times 3, the skill of the subordinate, or a total of 48. And the key to this theory will be to see how we match people of different skills together to produce outputs. Let's do a little thought. A small labor force consisting of 4 workers. There are 2 workers of skill level 3. I'll call them 3 workers, 2 3 workers, and there are 2 workers of skill level 4. That is, there are 2 4 workers. How should they be matched together to produce outputs? Well, there are 2 ways that they could be matched. One is to match one of the 4 workers with one of the 3 workers, and the other 4 worker with the other 3 worker. If we did that, we would have a total output of 96. We'd have 4 squared times 3 times 2, because matchings. The other way that they could be one of the 4 workers with the other 4 worker, and one of the 3 workers with the other 3 worker, that would give us a total output of 91. So the first kind of matching is what's called cross-matching, where you have different skills working together, a 3 worker with a 4 worker. The second kind of matching is called homogeneous matching, where you have people of the same skill working together. Now, in this case, cross-matching gives you more outputs than homogeneous matching. So in this example, we would expect to see cross-matching, because companies want to produce as much output as they can, and so they will match workers together in the most output-efficient way. But that conclusion that we get cross-matching depends very much on the numbers in this example. If we change the numbers a bit, we get a different answer. And let me show you what happens when we, instead of having 2 4 workers and 2 3 workers, we have 2 4 workers and 2 2 workers. So we've reduced the skill of the lower skilled people from 3 to 2. And once again, we can compare cross-matching with homogeneous matching. This time we get more output under homogeneous matching than with cross-matching. What do I conclude from all of this? Well, this is where those of you who have been napping are advised to wake up again, because I'm not going to have any more math. The conclusion is that the kind of matching we get depends very much on the available labor source, the available labor supply. And if we change the labor supply, we're going to typically change the way that people are matched together. So let's see that in action. I said I wanted to do a thought experiment comparing our two countries, the rich country and the poor country, before and after globalization. Well, now globalization means the ability to match workers across countries. So before globalization, all matching has to be done within a country. It's too expensive to employ workers from different countries. There's no way that you can coordinate that matching. But once you have globalization, once you've reduced communication costs, then cross-country matching becomes possible. So what do we get before globalization? Well, in the rich country, we'll have the A workers matched with the B workers, and we'll have the C workers matched with the D workers in the poor country. But after globalization, after international matching becomes possible, we'll have a very different matching pattern. The C workers, who used to be matched with the D workers, will now be matched with B workers in the rich country. So we'll have an international matching between C and D workers, C and B workers. The D workers, the lowest skilled people, will be left to their own devices. They will have to match with other D workers. So that's what happens as far as matching is concerned. But what we really care about is what happens to wages. So let's look at what happens to the wages of the C and the D workers before and after globalization. Well, before globalization, the D workers were matched with C workers. You probably know from experience that if you're working with someone who is, that makes you more productive. It's always good to work with competent, highly skilled people. It makes you more competent and highly skilled. So before globalization, the D workers benefited from being matched with C workers. But after globalization, when the C workers are now working with B workers, the D workers are left to match with other D workers. That reduces their productivity and means that their wages either stay the same or possibly even fall. So that's one effect of globalization. It exerts a downward effect on the lowest skilled workers' wages, the D workers' wages. Just the opposite happens for the C workers. The C workers have this new opportunity. They can now work with the B workers in the rich country. That's good for them, and they see their wages rise. So C worker wages rise, D worker wages stay the same or fall. Inequality has increased in the emerging economy. And this is what we submit happened over the last 20 years in emerging economy after emerging economy. People with some skills got new opportunities, and people without skills got left behind. So what do we do about this? If you accept the story that I've told, and I think there's a lot of evidence that the story is correct, what does it mean for policy? Well, one impulse that some politicians have had when they've seen what has happened to inequality is to say, it's globalization's fault. We have to stop globalization because it increases inequality. I think that's the wrong implication to draw, because as I said at the beginning, globalization has been a powerful force for increasing average prosperity. The problem is not with globalization per se, it's been with the division of the fruits of globalization. They've gone disproportionately to people who have high skills and not to people who have low skills. So what we should do is to try to raise the skill levels of the D workers so that they have new global opportunities too. How do we do that? We can give them more education, we can provide them with job training. The problem, of course, with education and job training is that they're expensive, and somebody's got to pay for it. Who is going to pay? Well, we can't ask the workers to pay for it themselves. We're talking about D workers who have almost nothing. They can't afford the education, to pay for the education or for the job training, so they're not going to do it. We also can't expect employers incentive to this job training and education. Why not? Well, if I'm a D worker, an unskilled worker, and you're an employer, you could give me training so that I could perform the tasks in your company. But if you did that, you'd be making an investment in me, and with that training, I could just as easily work for your competitor as for you. And if I worked for your competitor, your investment in me would be lost. So you might think twice about making that investment. And in general, employers are not going to make sufficient investments in D workers to eliminate this problem. The international agency, it could even come from, it has to get in. That I've gone a lot of that growth. And with that observation,
and by giving the opportunity for one person to ask question, and the question will be directly answered by Professor Maskin. For those who ask question, please mention your name and institution before the question. Answer your question and direct with maximum of 2 questions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, for those who are asking questions, please raise your hands and come to the standing mic. Okay, maybe this gentleman. Okay, yes, you can forward to the standing mic.
Test one, two, test. Thank you. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for the riveting lecture, Professor Maskin, and welcome to Indonesia.
Thank you.
And my question is, well, I have two questions, if you don't mind. First of all, do you think that global markets really plays a role in reducing inequalities? As in, shouldn't it be that, how does it really correlates to that? And my second question would be, how should policies regarding reducing inequalities be regulated? Should it be regulated internally, for example, by the government, or should it be left to competent private companies for them to arrange by themselves? My apologies. My name is Dewa Wibowo, and I'm a first-year student from the University of Airlangga. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that good question. On the first part, do global markets reduce inequality? Here, historically, we have a mixed answer. So historically, actually, the answer is yes. And the great globalization of the late 19th century is a very good example of that. As I mentioned, in the late 19th century, there was an enormous increase of trade between Europe and North America. Europe was the emerging economy, if you like, of the time. It had an abundance of low-skilled labor, and as a result of globalization, we saw low. That's a very clear example of where globalization was a force for improving. Has had a very different story. Most countries around the world have, over the last 20 years, decreased, and has changed into a globalization of production that has made the difference. Now, as to who should be taking steps to reduce inequality, I think there's a very strong case that we should be reducing inequality. We have only to look at what's happened in Europe and the U.S. to understand why that's so important. Who is going to take the steps to reduce inequality? Well, it's not enough, I would suggest, to leave it up to private companies to do skill training and to provide education. Because, as I argued, they simply don't have strong enough incentives to do that. Of course they do train workers, but they don't do enough training to eliminate the inequality problem altogether. So I think there's a very important role for government in reducing inequality. Government doesn't have to do the training and provide the education itself, but at the very least it has to provide the incentive for reducing. It has to provide the incentive for the education and skill training. For example, one thing that many governments around the world have done is to subsidize skill training by private companies. So the idea is that if a private company is willing to hire D workers and train them, then the company will get a tax break. That's the sort of policy which I think has been effective, and if done on a bigger scale, would make a problem. But thank you very much for the question.
For the second question, I would like to welcome Mrs. Alisa QMR Wahid to deliver her questions.
Thank you, Professor Maskin, for a very enlightening presentation. Indonesia currently is facing a new status of the population. In a few years, we'll be coming into the demographic dividend era or demographic nightmare era if we could not prepare our laborers to to be able to compete with other countries' laborers. Right. But it's only in a few years. And in a country as big as Indonesia, which the last population census showed 70% of the laborers have only a junior high school education level. With only a few span of years, I would like to have your view on how to accelerate the change in increasing the level of skills, because I think it's also dependent on the policies, the developmental policies of the government itself, whether they would be leaning toward industrial economy, or in the history of Indonesia, we are an agriculture economy. Thank you.
Very important question. How does a country get its population, say, from D level to C level, when there are only a few years to do it? First, let me make a confession. I am not an expert on the Indonesian economy by any means. And so it would be presumptuous of me to set myself up to Indonesia. With getting more children well educated is that their families in many poor say holds true even if you leave automation out of the picture. But if you bring automation into the picture, and of course in reality you have to do that because it's a fact of life, it actually makes what I have to say even more urgent. That is, to the inequality problem is to try to give D workers the opportunity to acquire skills, and this is true without automation. Then with automation, you have to do so even more, because the coming decades will be ones where if you're a D worker, you're increasingly out of luck, and where in order to continue to hold on to any job, let alone a good paying job, you will have to have some skills. Let me add that in the long run, I am not at all pessimistic about what automation will mean for the labor market. I don't think we're all going to be replaced by machines, very far from it. And the reason I say this is, again, because history is on our side, on human beings' side. There was a great industrial revolution. Many new machines, cotton gins, sewing machines, all sorts of new contraptions were invented in the same way that we now have self-driving cars. It was feats. In fact, there was a group called the Luddites who became famous for saying we've got to stop new technology because we'll all lose our jobs as a result. Well, the Luddites were wrong. There was a lot of new technology, and it's true that a lot of jobs were eliminated as a result of that new technology, but a lot more new jobs were created. And that, I think, is what is going to happen this time around, too. Yes, taxi drivers will lose their jobs because the taxis will be self-driving. And yes, many other fairly low-skilled jobs will no longer exist, but there will be plenty of new jobs, even more jobs than before, that will be created as a result of the new technology. Of course, they will involve new skills. So it won't be enough for people to rely on their old skills. They will have to acquire new skills, and so there will be a transition process, an educational process, but eventually I'm confident that these new robots and other sorts of technologies will give us all plenty of jobs and plenty of well-paying jobs. So I don't think there's reason to despair at all, quite the contrary.
Okay, for the next question, I will give the opportunities to the ladies in the middle with the white shirt.
Good afternoon, Professor Maskin. My name is Vivi Hashim. I'm from JAC School. When I was in the US, there are lots of products made in China. In my opinion, it is making China become giant in the economic, became rich in economic, because lots of manufacture or factory in China. Meanwhile, in the US, economic is slowly increasing because lots of manufacture in the US move to China, and then there are lots of by China people because of need more capital. And I'm sorry for my impolite question. Thank you.
So I just want to make sure I've understood the question. You're asking
Yes.
about whether the replacements of
Yes.
manufacturing, which used to take place in the U.S. by Chinese
yes.
manufacturers,
Yes, I mean,
has increased unemployment, or what is the particular question?
Okay, my particular question is, there are lots of product in the U.S. is made in China, not made in U.S. So made in China. So
Yeah.
I think it's more of product made in China, in rich country.
Yeah.
Second question is, and this is make your economic in the U.S. is slowly increasing, decrease.
So has this hurt the U.S.?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then my second question is,
No, I think that's already very important, and so
Yes.
let me concentrate on that. Thank you. I mean, what you've touched on was, for example, immensely important in the last presidential election in the US, where it was argued by President-elect Trump that China was responsible for the decline of the US because so much manufacturing is now been taken over by China. It's moved from the US to China. I think that's a misdiagnosis by Mr. Trump. I don't think that that's a correct analysis at all, because while it's true that American manufacturing, of steel, for example, has declined, at the same time, many other industries, high-tech industries, biotech industries, have been on the rise. And in the long run, it's those new industries which are going to keep the American economy strong and at the forefront. The move of manufacturing jobs from the US to China is, in the story I was telling, the assumption on the part of the C workers of China of work that used to be done by B workers in the US. That's not a bad thing either for China or for the US. The fact that one industry has declined in the US doesn't mean that the US is weaker. Quite the contrary.
And for
Today we will have another very special performance of Merak dance from Ubaya students.
Merak dance or peacock dance, his story actually comes from Pasundan, West Java. As the name implies, peacock dance is the implementation of the peacock life, especially the behavior when male peacock want to lure the peahen. Peacock movement, graceful and charming, so often used to serve the national or international event like today. Please enjoy the performance.
Give a round of applause to the Merak dance performance by Ubaya students. Before we wrap up the event, we have a very special session for Professor Maskin of Stone Inscription Signing, memento presentations from Ubaya, and goodie bags from Jamu Ibu and PT Viva Cosmetic as sponsors.
As the very rapid development of Ubaya, the university is planning to construct the new Ubaya Tower very soon. And to commemorate the coming of Professor Eric Stark Maskin, the university has prepared the most honorable location to place with Professor Maskin wishes to Ubaya. These very special wishes will be inscribed on the stone as a symbol of Ubaya's commitment to continuously being a source of innovation to reduce inequality and to promote peace and humanity. We hope that these wishes will inspire all of the Ubaya community everlastingly.
Professor Eric Stark-Maskin and Dr. Nemuel Danielpa, please come forward to the stage for the very special session. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Stephen Walla from Jamu Ibu and Mr. Yusuf Winarno from PT Viva Cosmetic as sponsors, please come to the stage to give the goodie bags for Professor Eric Maskin. Thank you. Mr. Stephen Walla from Jamu Ibu and Mr. Yusuf Winarno from PT Vivas Cosmetics, please return to your seats, while Professor Eric Stark-Maskin and Dr. Nemuel Danielpa, please remain on stage.
Now we invite the All Opinion Writing Competition winner to come forward for photo with Professor Maskin. This competition is held to invite public opinions about Professor Maskin topics of inequality in which the judges have determined. The third winner is Didik Siswantoyo with the title The Impact of Inequality on the Economic Sustainability in Indonesia.
The second winner is Teguh Wijaya Mulya with the title The Inevitability of a Neoliberal World. And
the first winner, Rofian Ayurnia, with the topic Peningkatan Sumber Daya Manusia sebagai upaya mengatasi kesenjangan ekonomi di Indonesia.
Dr. Sujoko Efrin, as the head of the Ubaya Bridges Organizing Committee, please come forward to the stage to give the prizes to the winners. All winners will receive Professor Maskin book, The Arrow Impossibility Theorem.
Book voucher of 500,000 rupiah for the first, second, and third winner, respectively.
And photo together with Professor Eric Maskin, Dr. Nemuel Danielpa, and Dr. Evrin. All the winners can return to your seats. Professor Eric Maskin, Dr. Nemuel Daniel Pah, and Dr. Sujoka Efrin, please remain on stage. Now we invite Mr. Anton Priyatno, Sarjana Hukum, the chairman of Ubaya Foundations, for giving the souvenir of Ubaya to Professor Eric Maskin.
Professor Eric Maskin, Dr. Nemuel Daniel Pah, Mr. Anton Priyatno, Sarjana Hukum, and Dr. Everin, please return to your seat.
Mass disband.
Marriott Hotel Surabaya, PT Pakuan Jati, PT Viva Kosmetik, PT Jamu Ibu Jaya, and Sono Kembang Catering for all the support.
And see you again in the next upcoming Ubaya event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that dream I'm dreaming.